5 a.m. in New York City. Good morning, I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Global equities extending their rebound rally as precious metals recovery and tech resets. Palantir adding fuel to those gains with a strong forecast. AMD, Big Pharma and consumer earnings on deck. And it's official. Elon Musk is merging SpaceX and xAI in a deal that values the combination at $1.25 trillion. All right, it's a very different picture this morning than it was yesterday morning. Let's take a look at these markets and where we stand. We are looking at a positive open. We did end up the session yesterday very positive with the S&P 500 now with a gain of more than 1.9% on the year, the same with the Nasdaq 100, and we are headed that way. Again, lots of small positives and medium-sized positives, including those Palantir earnings, the India tariffs getting reduced, so many other catalysts, and we'll take a look at metals in a moment and see that they're rebounding as well. Let's take a look at the bond universe. Not too much movement there, even as we hear that we're not getting BLS data Friday. We did see the back end of the yield curve rally, so we're at 491 and change there, and the 10-year yield at 428.75. The 2-year yield, though, is firmly in place at 358.40. It's not moving from that level. And here we have that rebound. Look, gold very close to $5,000 an ounce again. Silver back up 10%, but we're still around the $87, and a small little bit of weight to the US dollar index today, but essentially we have stabilized there. All right, let's get across now to Chloe Melly for some individual movers. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Palantir is up very strongly this morning after providing a revenue forecast that was way ahead of estimates. So this is quite the boost for the company that after quite a muted performance at the start of the year in terms of its share price. And analysts have said that the sales growth and the free cash flow were looking particularly good, but that one challenge going forward might be some growing competition from other AI players. But in the meantime, we are up more than 10% for Palantir. Moving on to another big mover, and that is Teradyne, which is also up this morning after providing also a revenue forecast that was way ahead of expectations. And analysts have said that this is a company that will benefit greatly from AI chips becoming more and more complex, because that will mean growing demand for its AI chip testing technologies. And therefore, we are up very strongly, almost 23% this morning. And finally, Rambus is down this morning after results and an outlook that disappointed investors, and that is putting an end to what had been a really positive share price performance for the company. And we are down almost 15% for Rambus this morning.
Big dent there for Rambus. Chloe, thank you so much. Chloe Melly there will be back with us later on. And also coming up in this hour, another data delay due to the partial government shutdown. We'll discuss that with Laura Cooper of Nuveen. Global stocks then in record territory as metals recover from their steep drop. Joining us now is Bloomberg Markets co-editor Sam Unstead. Sam, it's a bit of a chicken and egg question, I guess, but what caused the precious metals rebound, and is that what's causing the rally, or is this just dip buyers emerging across the board?
Well, I think what we actually saw yesterday, which was, in the morning, huge drop across metals markets, and then that was kind of impacting sentiment kind of everywhere. What ended up happening by the end of the day was that pretty much all of that was just confined to the metals market. So we ended up with stocks higher. A lot of miners, for example, in London ended the day higher. And we're seeing a little bit more of a rebound for those names today. But a lot of that volatility has kind of stayed in the metals market. The rebound today, if anything, is really just a function of the huge volatility that you've had over the course of the last couple of sessions. So really significant drop. And I think you're probably likely to see a few more days of this until investors decide exactly where they want to reprice metals at after this huge run-up that they'd seen.
Sam, are we in a new era for volatility? It seems it's been very elevated in particular corners of the market just since the beginning of the year.
I think we've probably been in that new era for most of the last year or so. I think underlying, gold, for example, and to an extent silver, has been that there's just extreme uncertainty across almost every part of the market. And so investors are looking for hedges, somewhere to put their money. That's been part of what's driven gold, plus then a kind of momentum trade. Silver's maybe a slightly different story to that. But what you're seeing today as well, as you kind of alluded to already, Bonnie, is tech stocks going back up again, because that story has got some new legs. There was a little bit of a rebound yesterday. That's following through, particularly out of Asia today and after Palantir's results. So I think no, I wouldn't say a new era of it, but certainly it's kind of getting compressed into some quite significant moments of volatility, and I think the metals market kind of showed that pretty clearly yesterday.
And you mentioned about massive demand for the Oracle bond offering as well, right, which may have come as a surprise. Are we very dependent on earnings season? So if we don't get the beats and raises that we've been getting, are we in trouble?
I think certainly within certain names, I think what you're going to start to see more and more of is investors being very selective and very exacting when it comes around to these earnings, so particularly from the major AI names. So Oracle's a very specific name in that because of the amount of debt they're taking on. But you saw it with Microsoft last week. You know, the reaction to Microsoft and Meta, very, very different, because there are certain bars now that they need to get over in terms of how much you're spending versus how much revenue you're making, how much growth you're delivering. And I think you're going to see that these companies are going to be almost taken on a kind of individual basis as earnings go through. But then in between that, if there's a decent AI story, it's giving it a bit of a lift.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us. That is Sam Unstead there. Turning to M&A now. SpaceX officially acquiring xAI, valuing the merged entity at $1.25 trillion. SpaceX said in a statement that the acquisition was to, quote, form the most ambitious vertically integrated innovation engine on and off Earth with AI rockets and the world's foremost real-time information and free speech platform. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Kate Duffy. That's an absolutely huge ambition for a statement there. What is Musk's intention behind the SpaceX xAI deal?
Well, this deal will really unify not only rockets and AI, but also space-based internet and social media, which would potentially make it like the most valuable private company in the world right now. So Musk's grand master plan is to put these data centers into space. He reckons it will be more cost effective and more energy efficient given the heat that is generated from the data centers and just how cold space is, that the temperature could offset the costs there. But he reckons that, you know, this space-based AI can really scale up these different technologies, and he's already laying the groundwork for this kind of plan. So he's recently filed or requested permission to launch about 1 million satellites into orbit with SpaceX for this plan. So we're really seeing the pieces of Musk's giant jigsaw puzzle coming together.
We're also looking at a potential IPO later this year, and according to people familiar with the details of that IPO, $526.59 per share is going to be the value of each share of the combined company. How do we get to that valuation, Kate?
Yeah, I mean, SpaceX is one of Musk's most valuable and successful ventures so far. It's, as you said, worth supposedly about $1 trillion. And yet we're expecting it to IPO at some point soon down the line. Now, merging SpaceX and xAI together means that Musk will potentially have to sort of propose a different growth trajectory story to its investors. And this is very beneficial, actually, for xAI, which is burning currently $1 billion a month just to be able to scale its technologies and operate. And xAI is also known or operates Grok, which X users will know very well. But SpaceX will be the cornerstone of this plan. As we know, it successfully launches reliable rocket launches from the US. NASA is very dependent on it. But also another lucrative business segment of SpaceX is its Starlink business. That's the space-based internet service that a lot of airlines are actually inking deals with at the moment. So, as I say, all of these things are coming together. And another thing that we've reported is potentially Tesla merging with SpaceX as well. So, yeah, Musk is bringing all of these business ventures together into one giant entity that potentially could happen very soon.
All right, Kate, thank you so much. That is Bloomberg's Kate Duffy there. Palantir adding fuel to the momentum in stocks after reporting significantly stronger than expected revenue forecasts. Tom McKenzie, host of Bloomberg Tech Europe, joins us now. Why did investors and analysts not see this coming, Tom? Where did Palantir come up with the extra for the forecast?
Yeah, look, in earnings past, they've performed very well and they've beaten again very comfortably. Citi analysts coming out with a note saying this is just an excellent set of results for Palantir. In the most recent quarter, they saw revenue growth of about 70%, and they're forecasting for the full year 2026 revenue growth of 61%, above $7 billion. Of course, when it comes to Palantir, there's always questions about the valuation, because this is a stock that is trading on a price to earnings of around 137. That's the forward price to earnings view over a 12-month horizon. So will it assuage some of those concerns? Certainly the analyst reaction to this reporting, and particularly the forecast for 2026, which again was a beat, has been positive. They've done very well at upselling to their existing clients. Of course, their major client is the Defense Department, or the Department of War in the US, but also, of course, controversially, ICE in the US, and so they face criticism for that. So the government buying of their products, particularly the Maven product, which is this AI-infused dashboard for decision-making, has been very successful for Palantir. They're trying to push more into the enterprise and private corporate space as well, so maybe that becomes more of a 2026 story. But again, the upselling has been pretty significant for Palantir. So for some, at least, this will go the distance in terms of reaching and meeting those questions about the valuation of a stock that, of course, over the last 2 years or so has run up about 800%, though year to date it's down about 17-18%.
Yeah, how much do we know about the private business, Tom? Because as you said, ICE and Homeland Security and the government, we know about all those contracts. And Cooper himself says that, the software system is capable of preventing an unconstitutional intrusion into the private lives of citizens by the state. But he doesn't give us details, really, on how that happens. Do we know anything about private clientele and how much they're using these same systems?
Well, some private clients will be a little bit more hesitant in terms of revealing that they're working for Palantir, because it is a company that has courted controversy, and certainly the CEO, Alex Karp, doesn't steer away from controversy. But it's clear that for 2026 and last year as well, the big push beyond those juicy government contracts is to get more embedded into the enterprise space, and to produce product and to ship product that is more closely aligned with the needs of companies, with enterprises as well. And you're seeing that whether it's the European operations with their headquarters here in London, or of course in the US. So I do think that will become more of a story, and we'll get more detail on that through this year.
And Tom, of course, we get AMD today after market close. What can we expect?
Yeah, look, this is a stock that's up about 100% year to date. The key question, I think, for analysts and investors will be, to what extent are they getting market share from NVIDIA? Again, this could continue to answer some of the questions in terms of the demand for these AI accelerators. There's a question mark about memory cost as well, because you have to combine these AI accelerators with the memory, with the high bandwidth memory that's produced by companies like South Korea's SK Hynix and Samsung as well. We know there is a shortage in terms of that memory, and that prices are going up. So whether or not that's a headwind for AMD, I think, will be a question as well. But really, it's to what extent it's expanding its market share, taking market share from NVIDIA, and whether there is a challenge around the shortage in memory, and whether that's a bit of a headwind for AMD.
Yeah, speaking of memory, SanDisk up 180% so far this year. Tom, thank you so much. Tom McKenzie there, host of Tech Europe. Now, two other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. President Trump is seeking $1 billion in damages from Harvard University. This came hours after the New York Times reported that the Trump administration had backed off demands for $200 million to satisfy accusations of wrongdoing by the Ivy League institution. Trump didn't specify under what authority he's looking for the $1 billion. French inflation unexpectedly eased to a 5-year low, staying well short of the ECB's 2% target. Consumer prices rose 0.4% from last year in January. French inflation has been an outlier among the euro area's biggest economies. Germany's latest inflation read is at 2.1%, Spain's at 2.4%. And Waymo is raising $16 billion at a $126 billion valuation. The funding round was led by new investors Sequoia Capital, DST Global and Dragoneer Investment. The company plans to use the funds to expand its fleet of vehicles and hire more staff around the world. Coming up, India stocks jumping after President Trump slashes tariffs to 18%. More next. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. The US and India finally reached a trade deal. President Trump rolling back punitive tariffs on India to 18% in return for an agreement that Prime Minister Modi would stop buying Russian oil. Bloomberg trade czar Brendan Murray joins us now with the latest. So we got this sudden deal. It almost came out of nowhere, Brendan. Did Modi back down? What happened?
Yeah, it seems like it did come together all of a sudden, and maybe it's a combination of the taco situation where Trump always chickens out and the fear of missing out on a deal with India, just the same way that the European Union concluded its free trade agreement with India last week. So the president announced that this 50% tariff that's on Indian imports is coming down to 18%. That 50 was among the highest in the world, so it was really hurting Indian exporters. And India apparently has agreed to purchase some $500 billion worth of American exports. Now, a lot of these details we haven't seen in writing yet. They're just, part of the handshake agreement, the back of the napkin sort of announcement that they made yesterday. So a lot of people, trade experts, people in government are still waiting for the fine print to see how long it's going to take, what specifically that India has agreed to purchase, and over what time frame.
Brendan, what have we seen in the past? I mean, Indian goods only account for about 3% of US imports, but does that number increase now?
Yeah, that would be the goal. Is that India imports into the U.S. U.S. exports to India were something like 50 billion through November last year. They would double those to something like 100 billion to get up to 500 billion over the next 5 years. But there's really a broader message being sent here by India in doing the deals with the European Union and now the United States. And the message is to China that these markets are starting to open up to the U.S. and Europe, and India has traditionally been a very tough market to crack into. And so, the message to Beijing is we'd better rethink how we're positioning ourselves with trade if this is the way the world is going, more toward the sort of a revision to globalization brought on by President Trump. And less of the old way where China could pretty much dictate the terms that it wanted to.
Yeah. Well, Indonesia seems to be next. Brendan, are we getting somewhere there? Do we anticipate a similar type of announcement soon?
Yeah, exactly. Indonesia seems to be next up. Again, these deals tend to sort of flare up when the president in the Oval Office has the opportunity to make a splash with them. And so that will be the next big one to watch. Indonesia. There are some other deals that are kind of still the fine print needs to be worked out. The EU deal still isn't completely over the line yet, and so these deals, and even with the India deal, they're going to be details that need to be hammered out. This isn't the end of it. This is the start of the end game, it would appear, by the two leaders announcing the broad outline of what they've agreed to.
Amazing, Brendan. Thank you for all of that context. That is Bloomberg's Brendan Murray. Coming up, the Clintons have asked again to testify in the Epstein inquiry. More on that and a look at what else is making headlines in your front page news next. This is Bloomberg.
I think 5 to 10% job displacement is likely. The onus is on us now to make sure we can give them other skills, upskilling or reskilling, so that they can have productive jobs. That does not count then the increase in jobs. When we increased R&D, we have hired 10,000 people more into R&D. So there is going to be much more hiring in those areas that are much more productive, but there is some job displacement. I'm honest about acknowledging that.
IBM CEO Arvind Krishna speaking on AI job displacement with Bloomberg earlier. Time now for your front page news. First up on the Wall Street Journal, former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton making a new offer to give depositions for a House committee investigation of sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. This just days ahead of an expected vote on holding them in contempt of Congress for allegedly defying subpoenas. The committee chair didn't say if the Clintons' offer was enough to satisfy the committee's subpoena. Next up, President Trump calling on Republicans to, quote, nationalize voting in the United States. The New York Times is saying it's an aggressive rhetorical step that will likely raise new worries about the administration's efforts to involve itself in election matters. The comments made on a conservative podcast follow a string of moves to exert more control over American elections. And finally, the Washington Post is reporting top Justice Department officials have stripped Trump ally Ed Martin of the bulk of his responsibilities, leaving him on the sidelines of many investigations. Martin will no longer head the Justice Department's Weaponization Working Group and has lost his title as an Assistant Attorney General. Martin has rankled his bosses at the Justice Department as he's deployed unconventional and controversial tactics in pursuit of investigations. All right, let's take a look at where we stand markets-wise. It looks like it might be a positive beginning to the day, at least for equities. This after the Asia session saw stocks higher, and of course with plenty of positive news and dip buyers emerging. So S&P futures pointed higher. Yields are moving higher today. We have the curve higher pretty much across the board, the 10-year yield above 428, and just a little weight to the US dollar index. Coming up, we'll speak to Nuveen's Laura Cooper. It's 5:30 a.m. in New York City. Good morning. I'm Bonnie Quinn with your Bloomberg Brief. Let's get you set up for the day. Global equities extending their rebound as precious metals recover and tech resets. Palantir adding fuel to those gains with a strong forecast. AMD, Big Pharma and consumer earnings on deck. And it's official. Elon Musk merging SpaceX and xAI in a deal that values the combination at $1.25 trillion. All right, equity futures pointing higher today after that rebound yesterday in the session. The S&P up more than 0.5%. The Nasdaq 100 was up 0.75%, of course, yesterday. We got that India trade deal. We also had Palantir earnings, which helped. We also had a precious metals rebound. So which came first? Well, it's anyone's guess. It's a tone shift, essentially, in this market. We are seeing yields higher, though. Let's take a look at the bond universe, because if you leave out the 2-year yield, which doesn't seem to be moving very much at all, we did have the 10-year, 30-year, that whole end of the curve moving higher. The 30-year yield now back up to almost 492. Let's take a look at those precious metals, because boy did we see a rebound, which is continuing today for gold. We're almost back at $5,000 an ounce again for gold, and silver up 10%, although with silver we're still around the $86.50 an ounce mark. There is a little weight to the US dollar index today, a small bit of strength in the Japanese yen. Of course, we did get the RBA hike as well, so that's the central bank cycle of hiking kicked off around the world down in the Antipodes. All right, let's get to some individual stocks to watch now. Here's Chloe Melly. Chloe.
Good morning, Bonnie. Palantir is up more than 10% this morning after providing a revenue forecast that came in way ahead of analysts' expectations. And so this provides quite a big boost for a company that had seen a fairly muted share price performance over the last month or so. But this set of results really reassured investors, and we are up quite strongly this morning. Moving on to another big mover, and that is Teradyne, which is also up very strongly, more than 20%, after also providing a revenue forecast that was ahead of estimates. And analysts have noted that the growing complexity of AI chips will be a really a big benefit for Teradyne because of the use of its testing services, its AI chip testing services. And finally, let's move on to professional publishers, and the shares in Wolters Kluwer and RELX and Pearson are all down this morning after Anthropic unveiled a new AI tool that can be used by companies' in-house legal teams. And so this is yet another sign that those companies might be displaced somewhat by generative AI, and therefore we are seeing some downward movements across that sector.
Fantastic stuff. Chloe, thank you so much. That's Chloe Melly there in London. No read on the labour market this week after the Bureau of Labour Statistics said it will delay the release of the January jobs report due to the partial government shutdown. JOLTS, which were supposed to be out today, also delayed. Joining us now is Laura Cooper, Head of Macro Credit and Global Investment Strategist at Nuveen. Laura, I guess we should be used to this now, but it's annoying not to be able to get a January read on the labour market, particularly after we went so many months last year without a proper read on the labour market. I mean, what does it do to your sort of daily thinking about the health of the US economy to not be able to get this data again this month?
Well, I think the challenge is really that facing the Fed in terms of their data dependence and what the lack of a labor market reading will provide for their future policy path. But I think if we look to last week's meeting, they were suggesting that they were seeing signs of labor market stabilization. The downside risks had been dismissed. And so they are on this extended policy pause. So I think the lack of data in the near term perhaps doesn't change their calculus too much. And if we look at what markets are pricing, they're not expecting the resumption of rate cuts until the middle of this year. So I think at the margin, maybe not doing much at this juncture to really shift market volatility, let's say.
What is your read of the health of the U.S. economy? You know, you mentioned how the Fed will be looking at this labour market data, but we have seen weak wage growth, for example. And, you know, many people are talking about the persistence of inflation and how it might even rear its head once again in the coming months.
Well, I think the state of the U.S. economy continues to be defined by resilience. We're going to get quite sizable tax rebates this year that's going to bolster consumer spending. And we've already seen consumer spending being relatively underpinned by those upper income echelons that we think will continue to persist. We also have that ongoing AI capex. Looking at last year alone, that added 0.5 to U.S. growth, and it's likely going to have similar levels of contribution this year. And then, yes, we are seeing signs of weakness, to your point, around wages. But overall, I still think this is an economy, certainly looking at the GDP tracking of late, that is running above potential. Yes, that does add risks to the upside on inflation. But I think at this juncture, we are still really in the sweet spot of U.S. economic activity. And that can continue to support risk sentiment and really prop up global equities going forward through the year.
Laura, you mentioned, you know, the AI capex cycle, and we saw on the credit side of things, Oracle garnering record demand for that $25 billion bond sale. But I do want to point out HSBC warning today that so much of the recent growth here in the United States has been propped up by AI in some form, whether through investment spending or the wealth effect. And HSBC saying any disappointment could reverberate through credit markets. Are you seeing that? Are you concerned about that?
I think it's a risk to watch at the margin, but at this juncture, we are seeing that AI spend largely being funded through operating cash flow rather than actually looking at debt. So while leverage is increasing, this leverage is coming from the most profitable companies, certainly looking at those hyperscalers. And yes, of course, any earnings disappointment is going to lead to idiosyncratic price action. But if we take a step back and look at the Q4 earnings backdrop, we are expected to see that tech leadership persist, around 26% year-on-year earnings expectations. We suspect that's going to continue to persist this year. But importantly, that advantage of tech stocks, I think, will start to narrow, and we will start to see this broadening out of the bull market rally even more so in the coming quarters.
Now, at Nuveen, you are also looking abroad, you know, outside of the United States, let's say, for, you know, opportunities, particularly in the credit sphere, and that was HSBC's point as well, that you might want to look elsewhere, to Asia or so, or what have you. Where are you in particular looking, Laura?
Well, I think we are seeing this overall constructive backdrop that's supporting this global growth upswing. And if we think about the fiscal stimulus that's being increasingly deployed in Germany, some signs of stabilization in China, we are seeing, you know, probably a bit more challenging growth in Japan, but certainly more constructive outlook than we have seen in recent years. All of those factors suggest that we are going to see investors increasingly look for that diversification away from U.S. assets at the margin. And if we look at fixed income in particular, we are seeing pockets of quite attractive opportunities in the rate space. But I think key for investors, and certainly the client conversations that I'm having, is looking to emerging market debt. We saw 3 consecutive years of quite sizable outflows, and so we are starting to see that sentiment pick up once again. Already year to date, we've seen more than $6 billion of inflows, and so we think that's a shift in sentiment. It's being supported by attractive carry. Overall, this global growth backdrop being quite constructive, and I think that's where we're going to see investors increasingly look for opportunities this year.
Moving back to the United States, how are you preparing for a potential Warsh-led Fed?
Well, I think certainly markets saw some reprieve with the appointment of Kevin Warsh last week. I mean, certainly that did assuage some fears around institutional credibility, the independence of the Fed. But I think that there's still some risks at the margin. If we think about his hawkish historical tilt versus his more recent dovish alignment with the U.S. administration, there is still some ambiguity ahead. And so we're leaning more into the potential curve steepening on the back of that. You know, if we do see some restraining of the balance sheet, that does tend to lead to longer or higher long end yields. But we also would suspect that would come in terms of shorter front end yields with more rate cuts. So again, more ambiguity on what the yield space looks like, but having more conviction in terms of that curve steepener that I think will be further abetted by the fiscal dynamics coming through in the U.S. as well.
All right, Laura, thank you so much. Laura Cooper is still calling for 2 rate cuts this year. Laura Cooper of Nuveen joining us there. Now, 2 other top stories trending on the terminal this morning. The public commission that's building the $16 billion Gateway rail tunnel between New York and New Jersey is suing the Trump administration over a federal funding freeze. Project officials say they'll stop construction February 6th unless funding is restored. The Gateway project would provide a new route under the Hudson River for Amtrak and New Jersey Transit. Homeland Security Secretary Christine Noem says every officer in the field in Minneapolis will now wear a body camera. The directive is effective immediately and comes after a national outcry over the killings of 2 U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. Santander and NatWest are looking to offload billions of pounds in UK pension assets to an insurer. According to sources, the deliberations are at an early stage. The UK's pension buyout market, where firms pay insurers to take on their financial obligations to retirees, has been booming in recent years as higher interest rates reduce the value of promised payouts. Coming up, Republicans who threatened to block the shutdown deal are starting to stand down. More on that. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. The partial government shutdown continues. Republican opposition to the deal has led talks to crumble. President Trump urging his party then to pass the legislation, posting on Truth Social, quote, immediately. And there can be no changes at this time. This led to 2 conservative holdouts to clear the way for a vote today. Joining us now is Mika Solner of Bloomberg Government. So Mika, what exactly is the threat here? Why is the opposition crumbling at this point?
Yeah, I think this just goes to show how much of a hold President Trump continues to have on House Republicans in general, but also, Senate Republicans at large, too. But, there was a group of House Republicans in the Freedom Caucus conservative group that really wanted to attach the SAVE Act in particular, some election laws to the funding package and try and get some wins for their section of the party on this. But Trump quickly, told them to stand down. And I think that now everything's falling in line here. So it just goes to show how strong the president is on that aspect.
Let's move to Iran because things continue to look to be improving there, at least. President Trump speaking to reporters in the Oval Office and saying he anticipated talks with Iran over a new nuclear deal.
Yeah, this is one step towards diplomacy that the White House is really moving when it comes to Iran. I know that the president had put out previous posts on social media saying that, they will use potential military action if possible because of some of the unrest on the ground and the way that the Iranian government has been handling peaceful protesters and the killings that we have allegedly seen. And so I think that the president is taking steps to try and de-escalate some of that tension. And so we're going to see what happens here. I'm going to be asking officials today about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, there's this Harvard University continued push from President Trump. First of all, he seems to be backing off the $200 million he was looking for, and then suddenly now he's looking for $1 billion from Harvard University. What's the story here, Mika?
Yeah, I mean, this is part of an ongoing feud that the president has had with Harvard and other universities, and I think that we're seeing that Trump is not afraid to use some of the legal authority he has and challenge anybody that he thinks that is being unfair or causing damage to his reputation and saying things that he believes that are untrue. So I think that we're going to see more from this lawsuit, and he's going to continue to try and push legal action where he can.
All right, with the DC update, Mika, thank you so much. That is Mika Solner of Bloomberg Government. Turning to deals, Elon Musk has officially merged SpaceX and xAI, valuing the combination at $1.25 trillion. SpaceX saying in a statement that the acquisition was to, quote, form the most ambitious vertically integrated innovation engine on and off Earth, with AI, rockets, and the world's foremost real-time information and free speech platform. Joining us now is Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence. I guess in some ways, Matt, this simplifies things for Elon Musk, but what is the rationale behind these two companies coming together? Does it make sense?
Yeah, it simplifies things maybe for Elon Musk, but it certainly makes things a lot more complicated for would-be investors in SpaceX. I think people have been anticipating a SpaceX IPO for some time, and it was becoming a lot clearer it's going to happen this year. That was a fairly clean, kind of rocket launch and satellite venture. Now you kind of roll into that, the Grok AI platform and X, and suddenly it becomes a lot more complex. I think one of the issues that have been talked about with xAI is the $1 billion a month cash burn that it's kind of eating through. And so, I think this is going to change, I think, the way in which investors need to look at that IPO, assuming it does still come down the line. And I think that's kind of really the motivation behind this is Elon Musk looking to kind of pool assets together to kind of solidify the funding opportunities he can get for all these different aspects of what's quite a complex business now.
Yeah, well, we're still looking at an IPO potentially later in the year, and the valuation would put each share at more than $550, according to people who are familiar with the details of, I guess, what would be a prospectus. I mean, is that a reasonable valuation, Matt? It sounds pretty, rich.
Yeah, it's like a $1.25 trillion is the valuation that is implied in this deal, which is pretty rich. Looking at a $50 billion IPO. Numbers are still pretty thin on the ground, so it's kind of hard to kind of figure out what the multiples would be. But I think it's fair to assume that they'd be pretty rich and based on quite spectacular mid to long term growth for the business as a whole, both across the traditional space launch ventures, putting this million plus satellite data center into space and everything beyond. So I think it will be really a kind of a moonshot valuation.
Palantir, obviously, it's a volatile stock, right? But we've seen a massive jump. It gave a stronger than expected sales outlook. It seems to continue to do this, Matt. How are analysts and Palantir watchers missing the custom that it seems to be getting every quarter?
Yeah, I mean, as you say, that the 2026 sales outlook, something like 15% ahead of where the market was expecting in the Q4. They reported also strongly ahead. They are still seeing very strong demand from their existing customers with a retention rate over 140%, or around 140%. Obviously a lot of that business is with the US government. We're seeing a lot of, I guess, geopolitical tension around the world, which is kind of increasing demand for a lot of the systems and AI support they deliver. And obviously the immigration crackdown in the US is something that they support strongly too. And I think that to some degree reflects some of the volatility we see. Obviously that those ICE tactics in the US have come under a lot of scrutiny recently, but there's clearly a strong immigration story in the US, and they are an important support for that. So I think obviously the other thing is just like the broader AI picture. Every month or so the AI picture goes through a bubble, not a bubble, and I think they're kind of exposed to that too. But the best thing they can do is expand their revenues, beat expectations, and that's what they're doing, and that's what their investors will be pleased about.
Well, big jump pre-market, even though the stock had been tanking pretty much this year, tanking relatively speaking, right? Matt Bloxham, thank you so much. Matt Bloxham of Bloomberg Intelligence. More earnings on deck this morning then, with pharma giants Merck and Pfizer both set to report before the bell. Joining us now is Bloomberg's Sonia Wind. Pfizer, Sonia, has already guided to little or no sales growth this year. So what will investors be watching for?
Yeah, so it's certainly going to be a challenging year for Pfizer. As you said, little to no sales growth expected for 2026. And that comes amid patent expiries for some of its blockbuster drugs. And also the COVID-related revenues are expected to become increasingly less meaningful. So the key question is, can the new wave of drugs deliver and help Pfizer to boost performance again? And that's also what the main focus is on. So any timings on important study readouts will be closely watched. That includes a lung cancer drug and also the 2 obesity assets that Pfizer inherited with the acquisition of Metsera. And specifically, the latter one could really change the narrative for Pfizer if the drugs are successful. So that's what will be watched. And one upside could be more cost savings if management manages to cut costs more aggressively. But other than that, it looks like a bumpy year.
Yeah, and speaking of patents, Merck is also reporting today, and it's also preparing to deal with patent expiries. What should we expect here?
Yeah, so it's a huge challenge for Merck. Keytruda is its most important drug. It makes up almost half of its sales. So dealing with that patent cliff is really essential. And also its second most important drug is the HPV vaccine Gardasil, and that is also facing headwinds already. So similar to Pfizer, the question is, how does it manage to deal with that rather than the near-term earnings? What is the long-term strategy? And that will be closely watched by the investors. And Merck has already presented some new drugs and how they could potentially fill the gap. But the problem is that these still face significant regulatory and clinical hurdles. So there is a need for more positive catalysts. And some analysts have also said maybe there's more wood to chop in terms of M&A. One other interesting aspect, both for Pfizer and Merck, will be any impact, any details on the deal that the company struck with US President Donald Trump under the most favored nation policy. So those are the main themes.
Amazing. Sonia, thank you. Well, the Pfizer call at 9 and the Merck call at 10, or vice versa, in fact, so we'll be listening out for those. That is Sonia Wind there for us, and we thank her. Coming up, we're going to get you set up for your day ahead. Fed speak and earnings on deck. This is Bloomberg. This is Bloomberg Brief. I'm Bonnie Quinn in New York. Now a look at what's ahead today. Earnings continue. We have Merck, Pfizer, PayPal and Pepsi all before the opening bell. No JOLTS data, but we do get Fed speak from Richmond Fed President Tom Barkin. That's at 8 a.m. Eastern. And then after the market close, we get AMD, Supermicro, Clorox and Chipotle. Huge week for earnings. Let's take a look at some micro movers now before the bell. Obviously, Palantir is roaring today. Gains after that robust revenue forecast. It's up 11%. Now, it had dropped quite substantially this year. Teradyne also reaping the rewards on its strong sales report and outlook. That stock had also been lagging. It's up nearly 25% in the pre-market. And DaVita Healthcare, another huge mover, up 14%. Its adjusted earnings per share beat. This is your macro picture today, particularly the metals. We have gold rebounding another 5%, almost at $5,000 an ounce. Silver rebounding as well. A little weight to the dollar index, perhaps a bit of stabilization there. That's it for Bloomberg Brief.